Hello, everybody, virtually and non-virtually. My name is Steve Sklar. I am an immigration lawyer, practicing immigration law for the last 28 years. I'll start by saying restlessness or wanderlust, if you will, is one of the engines of migration. And I think of this because while I was getting ready to give this talk, I had told Elaine, who sets these things up and is sitting right here, that she should, write me up as somebody who practices immigration law for 28 years by day. And I noticed that I've said to people over the last few years that immigration law practice is my day job, and at other times I do improv and I do storytelling. And it occurs to me, like, what's up with that? I mean, I'm not waiting on tables, am I like going on auditions and waiting for my big Broadway break? What is this? I'm waiting for NPR to call me about my storytelling, and, maybe Ira Glass and Terry Gross are going to have a tug of war over who gets to interview me. I mean, no, but, it occurs to me that maybe some of the wanderlust that actually got me into immigration law in the beginning is operating here on some weird level. So, how I got into immigration law, I'll just talk about that, and then I'll be telling you stories that emanate from my 28 years of my day job. When I started, I got out of law school and I thought I would be God's gift to corporate law. I was wrong on a number of levels, but most importantly, I was wrong because I really had developed kind of a full-blown allergy to working in a corporate setting, a company with a boss, and my boss had a boss. And this became clear to me when I had a meeting at my first job at a suburban law firm with a mentor. The firm had set up a mentor system. So a junior partner interviewed me, and he was sort of reviewing my legal writing. And I noticed he had marked up the margins of something I had written. And at one point, he told me very pointedly that one should never begin a paragraph or even a sentence in legal writing, or maybe any writing, with the word similarly. It should always be the word likewise. And now, I don't know if you all agree with that, in which case I think you're wrong. But the point is that I really kind of chafed at this kind of thing. So it wasn't a good fit for me and the firm. And the firm realized it after a couple of years, and they laid me off, which was the best thing they could have done for me. So I went out on my own, which is what I should have done years earlier. Started my own practice, started with entertainment law, didn't work out. It was very hard to start that as a solo. So I was casting around, I was at loose ends, and it occurred to me, maybe what I should do is not look for an area of law to get into, but think about the kind of people that I wanted to provide legal services to. And I had worked earlier in film production on a film in Mexico City. I had played a little very amateur soccer, and I always got along with Latinos. So one day I talked to this guy, Edgar, who was laying tile in the unfinished bathroom in our house. And I said to him, Edgar, if you needed people who, if you have, friends of yours or yourself, what kind of legal services would you guys need? And he said, immigration. And something clicked. So that was how I, through a sort of restlessness, ended up in immigration. And in order to get into the field, I apprenticed with an outfit in Brooklyn, headed by a Catholic priest named Father Bob, pro bono immigration outfit. And I volunteered with him. So, that kind of thing got me into the profession. But I will say, as far as migration, my own path professionally, and also my clients, as hard as it can be to leave a place where you have lived and had your being, it's the real hard part is arriving at the new place and settling in and becoming functional there. So case in point, the first moment I felt like I became an immigration lawyer was when I had to meet for the first time Father Bob at the Federal Building in downtown Manhattan, 26 Federal Plaza. I show up there one morning. I'm supposed to meet him at the immigration court area in 10 minutes. And I fetch up at the plaza there and I see, off of Broadway, the plaza, there's a line there and it's got to be at least like 400 people. And they're, immigrants and maybe some lawyers sprinkled in, and it's not moving. It's like a 3-hour line. And I think to myself, oh my God, I am not even going to be able to get into the building, which is not something they cover in law school. So I'm stymied, I'm paralyzed. It was a couple of bad moments, and then almost like Yoda-like, a mantra sort of sounds in my ear, something Father Bob had told me earlier. It's like Yoda, but with a Brooklyn accent. And what I hear then is, if there's a line out front, Steve, use the Duane Street exit and entrance and tell them you're going to Social Security. So that's what I did. I got into there was like 4 people in line. I got right in and I got past that moment of paralysis. Had I not done that, I probably would have had some different day job for the last 28 years. But there it was, so the break-in is tough. And I will say for the next little bit, similarly, a couple of weeks later, I was supposed to meet Father Bob at that same building, and no problem, I got in order to do something about an immigration hearing, like immigration court, deportation defense. So I met him at the appointed time in the hallway on like the 11th floor. And he had his shoulder bag that was, as usual, stuffed full of manila folders because he handled lots of cases. He takes out a folder, gives it to me, and I say, what do you want me to do with this? And he says, handle it. And then he disappears into a courtroom. So I open the folder and I look at it, and there's, I have a case. My client that he's given me is an applicant for political asylum. He's from Asia. He's claiming asylum on account of he's been persecuted for being a Christian, which is a problem in his home country. And I look up and lo and behold, there's my client, 30-something Asian guy, very pleasant manner, very pleasant smile. I remember wearing a nice sort of black vinyl jacket. And, he doesn't speak a word of English, and I don't speak a word of his language. But a minute passes and lo and behold, there's the interpreter with us that Father Bob had arranged for us to have. And I talked to her, her English, she hardly speaks English herself, but we discovered that we can communicate kind of. So, and I look at the folder and I see that I am to appear, this is a hearing in 10 minutes before Judge, I'll call her Edna Ramirez. Now, I had seen her before because Father Bob had had me in the weeks earlier just sit in on hearings, and I know that she's a tough judge. And on this type of case, she's likely to ask things to suss out whether he's legitimately a Christian, such as what are the Gospels, who is Matthew, questions that I'm not sure I could answer, but, that he should be able to deal with. So, we don't have a lot of time. So I figure I better cut to the chase. I talk to the interpreter. I turn to her and I say, ask him, pointing to the client, who is Jesus Christ? And I have the impression that she does understand the question. There's a light in her eye, and she turns to him and she talks to him in their language, and he seems to understand. And he turns to me and he gives me the nicest smile and shakes his head from side to side, indicating the international, information for doesn't ring a bell. So I think I said out loud at that moment to, I'm not sure whom, I think we have a problem. So, we go in and I go before Judge Ramirez, and we ended up withdrawing the claim and asking for and getting something called voluntary departure, which is like deportation, but sort of gentler. My client is allowed to just leave and he just disappears into the woodwork and I never hear from him again. But, so my takeaway from that is, you really need a little more time to prepare. I think Father Bob had overestimated what I could do with this file in very little time. If I had it to do over again, we'd figure something out in advance. But okay, so the break-in can be tough. Another thing that happens after your first sort of landing in a new life in a new world is you look around and, try to get the lay of the land more. And for me, in my day job of the last 28 years, that has mostly meant trying to understand my clients and get a better feeling for what is their experience of immigration. And, it's sort of interesting, like for many of my clients, including the one I'm about to tell you about, it can feel like passing through our immigration system is like being pushed through a wire mesh and hoping that you end up intact on the other side. So this case I'm thinking of was a husband and wife green card case based on marriage, routine case, strong case, nothing super complicated. The husband was a U.S. citizen and the wife was the foreign spouse looking for the green card. She was from Western Europe, a country that we'd all be happy to be transported to if fate suddenly made us live there. She was pretty highly educated. She had a law degree. In fact, I think she had practiced some immigration law. And that made it sort of quicker for me to brief them on the case. They were there with their 2-year-old toddler, pretty active kid, but calm at the time. And so I tell them about the basics of the processing of the case. And at a certain point, my client, the woman asks me, well, is there anything that could go wrong? And I mean, I like to always brief my clients very, very thoroughly. So I said, well, it's immigration. I mean, things could always go wrong. So I explained that there was a possibility, very small risk, that things could, for technical reasons, kind of go sideways and there could be a glitch, but not to worry. First of all, that's highly unlikely to happen. And second of all, if it does, then you just, you would have to leave the US and process from outside in Europe, and there'd be some delay, but it's not like fatal or anything. And it's only at that point that I learned that she was kind of high strung or, nervous, whatever, because she burst into tears. And, it was the glitch that she focused on, not my trying to emphasize this was not likely. And in fact, she's not just crying, she was like weeping. And then something kicked in for me that was sort of unusual, which is, so the improv at that point I've been studying for a number of years. Like, one of the main things that you're supposed to learn from it is to listen to your scene partner. And that is not just about listening to the words they're saying or the meaning of the words, but even better, if you can get a sense of why they're saying what they're saying or why they're doing what they're doing, you can really build strong scenes together. So this sort of unusual for me kicked in this sort of real life situation. As I was looking at the woman, so immediately her husband and I had started trying to convince her to stop crying. Like, there's no reason to be that worried and stuff. And the more we did that, the harder she was crying, particularly when the husband was trying that. And so I realized two things, like my improv brain sort of kicked in. One was that the husband, and the wife, the tension between them, I knew that they were sort of both hard-headed people, but I realized that this tension in the moment, this was not their first time. They had probably been in this place many times earlier. And the second thing that came to me, I had this sort of insight, which was really rare, that no, what she wants in this moment is not to be convinced to stop crying. She wants just to be heard. She wants to have her, anxiety, her upset acknowledged and accepted and allowed to be, So, and it was uncanny. Like, from the instant that I had that realization, even before I reached over and handed her a box of tissues, the air in the room seemed to change. Maybe it was my body language, maybe I sat back, or the look in my eye, or whatever. Like accepting that she was upset, like, it's okay, you could be upset. From that instant, she started to, breathe more slowly and started stopping crying. So that was an example of kind of getting to understand your client that has happened. Another example I could give you is sometimes, doesn't happen often, humility for the lawyer you may learn something. It doesn't come easy to me. I think it's an occupational hazard that we can get annoyed at our clients. A kind of thing that annoys me often is clients, particularly if they're sort of, successful business people, maybe US citizens who are sponsoring somebody else. There can be a sense of entitlement and also a feeling like they know everything. And like when they don't listen to you, you want to say, okay, who, first of all, like, and second of all, like, whose day job has it been for years now to be an immigration lawyer, not you, but I don't necessarily say that, but that's an often a reaction I may have. So in this one case, though, I learned something from a client I'll call Dan. He was a successful businessman who dealt on a daily basis with your high net worth individuals, very competent, a veteran of doing that work. He had a small company, charming guy, very good at what he did. And I screwed up his case. I made a mistake. He was sponsoring a valued employee, a woman, for a green card based on work. And the first part of that kind of case, you deal with the Department of Labor. It's something called a labor certification application. And I committed a typo on that. I had to indicate that the woman had worked in a certain job until the end of April. I filed this on paper instead of digitally, so it didn't get picked up that I had made a mistake. I put down April 31st. April only has 30 days, kids. It took a few months, but the Department of Labor, being what it is and having the habits that it has on these cases, they didn't like call me up and say, what's this April 31st? Did you mean April 30th? No, they denied the case, and then it was up to me to appeal it, which, that's normal. Okay. So I immediately sent an appeal in. The Department of Labor has a policy that harmless error of this type, attorney error, harmless typo, whatever, no fraud, it's supposed to go into a fast track appeals queue and they just rectify it. But it just sort of languished in their regular appeals queue for a while. And that had a waiting time of 3 years. So my clients weren't happy. I knew they wouldn't be. I wasn't either. So I did two things. One, I started to prepare to refile the case, which would be another 8 months delay. But I also tried to, make contact with the Department of Labor to try to get the thing put in the fast track pile. I actually found the name of the director of the Atlanta Processing Center, which was processing the case. I not only emailed him, I got him on the phone and I told him, could you put it in the other pile? And he was like, yeah, okay, we'll see. And then I also contacted experts, like people who've written books on this stuff that know more than I do about these cases, to see if there was a way to break through and get an appointment. And they said, no, it's not a walk-in center. There's no access by the public. You're doing everything you can, and the refiling is probably the way to go. So I told Dan, my high-powered business client, and he was like, well, I'm going to Atlanta soon, and could I just try going to the building and talking to someone? And I said, no, it can't be done, Dan, So a couple of days later, I get a call. It's Dan. He says, I'm in the building in Atlanta, and I've got a guy here who's ready to help us. And could you just remind me what I need to ask him? So I said, well, okay, first of all, just tell him we want the case to go into the fast track, appeals queue, harmless error. But second of all, like, how did you do that? It's not possible. And he said, well, all right, you were right. There's no public access. I went to like the 14th floor where the department is, and there's a locked door and there's like a keypad, so, but, I figure out, I look around, and he tells me, and it's like around noon, and I find like down the hall, there's like a men's room. And I figure, everybody has to go sometime, so he waits, and sure enough, a guy comes out of the locked door, and goes into the men's room, and Dan goes in after him, and they strike up, he puts on the charm, and they're talking about, he tells me, well, Bernie, I met Bernie, and he's like an Atlanta Braves fan. They've been talking baseball, and Bernie says, Bernie told me I'll pull the file, no problem. And a couple of days later, the case is approved. So, every now and then clients, maybe you do learn from them, and then okay, so that, and then another thing I'll tell you about is sometimes, rarely, I'm handling a case, and it occurs to everybody involved that there's more to life than green cards and visas, even though that's what I do for them and that's what we really care about. So this next thing sort of demonstrates that. I had a case a number of years ago. My clients were a 90-year-old retired lawyer, little sort of walnut sort of nut of a guy, great shape for 90, a guy named Joe. And he was sponsored, he had a home health aide who was a woman from Eastern Europe, towered over him, 50-something, big-boned woman, Daniela, he called her Danny. And he needed a home health aide, even though he was in good shape for 90. Because his wife had died a couple of years earlier. And he needed somebody to help him cook and clean and do errands and stuff. And the two of them got along great. They would banter and sort of chide each other in this easygoing way that bespeaks mutual goodwill. So I was working on their case. It was also an employment-sponsored green card case. Labor certification was involved. And it was a straightforward, strong case. The only real challenge was the timing, because there was a lot of delays due to quotas and other things in the case. So we expected it would take many years, but it went through the system faster than we expected. In a year or so, which was kind of fast, we got labor certification approved, no problem. And then we're waiting, maybe another year or so for the green card interview at the last phase. And unfortunately, in that period of time, lymphatic cancer got its claws into Danny. Okay. So she was, pretty hard hit with that. And by the time we got the interview notice, interview coming in 2 weeks, she was already getting chemo and her hair had fallen out in patches. And I actually had this sort of nerdy legal concern about it. Of course, I was concerned about her health, but for the case, I was worried because she was now taking to wearing a kerchief because of her hair thing. And there's a rule at immigration at USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the agency formerly known as INS, that you're not allowed to wear a head covering at the green card interview unless it's a religious thing. And that wasn't her. I did think for a while maybe of suggesting she should shave her head and make a sort of fashion statement, but no, that was a bad idea. So I was worried that at the interview, the examiner, it would come out that she was, sick and had cancer and getting the chemo, and how could she be a home aide for anybody? And maybe the case would be denied. But in the event, it turns out we got a very nice examiner, and we did disclose about the chemo and the cancer, and he had no problem, and he approved the case. Great. So I will say, at this point, Joe and Danny are no more. So it falls to me to remember, everything about their case. And something that my files don't show is the fact that, the main files, is that she really didn't live that much longer. She only lasted another 2 months. And the only good that she ever got out of the green card was that for the first time in a number of years, it made her feel free to leave the US again and to go back to her home country. She had not done that, even she was thinking of it when she got sick, but she wanted to get the green card so she could sponsor her husband and her teenage son to green cards by getting her own green card. But, what happened was that the only benefit of the green card, she went back home and she could be in their company, and she died in their company. But the image that stays with me even more than anything I've said from that case is after we had that green card interview, we exited the federal building in Newark, New Jersey. So we took our leave of each other, and the snow is like falling slantwise. It was early spring. And we get to an intersection where I have to turn off down Orchard Street where I had parked, and they're going ahead on Walnut Street where they had parked. And I remember this image of them, the two of them walking arm in arm. I'm getting choked up, away from me. The tall, big-boned, 50-something caretaker leaning for support on her diminutive 90-year-old sponsor and indeed friend. So perspective there, I guess, beyond immigration. So I will say another thing is that you learn, that I've learned in my day job, what had been my new world. Occasionally, I'll learn something about myself, maybe have a moment, that's sort of like looking in the mirror, seeing how I'm dealing with practicing immigration law. So this next thing is about that. I should mention that, sometimes I can feel stress. I'm mainly a solo practitioner. My wife, Nikki, is retired. She's my named partner, but she's retired from the practice of law and practices and teaches Hebrew school, and more power to her. But some years ago, she bought me one of the best gifts I've ever gotten to sort of deal with the strain of having your own business or whatever. Maybe she didn't think of it that way, but she bought me a gift of 16 alphabet style blocks. But they're nice. They're sort of antique-y looking, letters. And I like to, every couple of days, I'll rearrange them to spell out words, and I'll put them on the filing cabinet that I can clearly see from my desk, as ways of just addressing whatever stress I'm feeling, or, notes to self about how to sort of get my act together. And that's good, because sometimes you need that. So, all right, put that to one side. The day in question that I'm thinking of, a client, another one of these business person clients of mine, a good client, I'll call Ed, called me up, and I saw, his name on the caller ID. And I should say that I had built up a certain amount of anger at Ed. We had ongoing business for a number of years, still do. He's gives me repeat business, which is like the lifeblood of almost any business, certainly a law practice. I handle like H-2B cases for him. Those are seasonal, yearly sort of visas to get, supplementary staff. And they're really, the reason that my colleagues, most of them are smart enough to stay away from doing this kind of work is they're fraught with opportunities for mistakes, typos, and even if you do everything letter perfect, you can be tripped up by early quota exhaustion that causes you to get no staffing for your client. And that can just happen no matter what. So we were having some difficulty, I think, in that type of case in the week or so before this phone call. And I think probably Ed had been also having some maybe personal problems or something. I mean, he would argue if I called him a type A personality, but he can be forceful. He's a successful business person. And he had taken to calling me on the carpet in a way that you now know I don't particularly like, treating me like, I own you, you're an underling, rather than a peer or whatever. And I had started to really build up resentment, and I was going to let him have it. And then I see this particular afternoon, the call comes in and it's Ed. I can see on the caller ID. And I've been sort of waiting for this to let him have it. So I pick up the phone and a signal, if I had wanted to pick up on it, that I was angry. I stood up at my desk to take the call. I'm alone in the room, just to give me like the physical purchase to let him have it, so that's a sign already. So he starts in on me, calling me on the carpet and stuff, and which was a bad move for him at the time. And we start going back and forth, and I'm angry, and I'm kind of letting him have it. At one point I said, maybe we should rethink whether we should work together again, maybe it's time. And then at the height of it, I remember saying to him, I don't like your tone. you know, like I'm talking to like a 4-year-old, you know, this is a good client, but it's like, I don't like your tone. And like, from that point forward, he starts to back off because he needs me to work on the case. And whatever, for whatever reason, it has that effect. And he says, Steve, okay, I can see you're angry. It's Friday, you know, why don't we'll take the weekend, you know, and then we'll revisit and you know, and like that. And I'm like, fine, you know, I'm still like leaning in. You know, I've kind of got what I want, but I'm still like, you know, leaning in. I'm like, fine, you know, and I hang up the fine, and I hang up the phone, and only then do I look up and I see that the blocks that I had spelled out for myself earlier that day, it says, "You got to calm down." And as a bonus, I like to use all 16 blocks, and I use them particularly, you know, perfectly. So that was like that, you know, that was good advice. I mean, if you can take it, that was note to self. So, all right. So here we are at the last story I'm going to tell today, which is, you know, as gratifying as it is to succeed, you know, most of my cases are administrative law, sort of on the papers, applications. That's most of my work. Fairly predictable, fairly routine, despite, you know, sort of hassles from the government that come up. And but I think the ones that are the most gratifying to me, that I like to remember the most, are cases that maybe the stakes are high for the clients. You know, one type of case, like my earliest client base was Latinos. In the Latino community, you know, there may be people who have overstayed visas or whatever that are here without status. And sometimes it's possible for a lawyer to legalize them, you know, totally legitimately. The system allows for that. Percentage-wise, not many, but, you know, I can sometimes help people. And those are gratifying cases because it means a lot to those clients. But I would say even more so are even higher stakes cases. And I'll mention now, you know, the details of one of those. Actually, you know, when your client is in detention, those are inherently sort of pressured cases. And what I'll do is I'll recite for you now something that I, you know, wrote a number of years ago about this. I should also mention, you know, the people who are here, you know, out of status, if in the Latino community, are known as illegales, but whatever. So I had a client, and this is how I wrote up the, you know, the experience of visiting a client in detention. You know, cases with high stakes can be very gratifying, although, you know, of course, the thing is to succeed at them. But anyway, here's a description for you. It goes like this. Aliens that are detained by the government in the New York metropolitan area are usually held on the outskirts of Elizabeth, New Jersey, about 7 miles as the crow flies from the Statue of Liberty. The buildings that serve this purpose are the Essex County Correctional Facility, and across the parking lot from it, the more collegiately named Delaney Hall. To get to these places, you drive down a long road lined with warehouses and frequented by large trucks. Spirals of razor wire top the chain link fences that surround these facilities. When you go inside, you go through a metal detector, you put your valuables in a locker, and then you navigate through to get to the visiting room area where you'll meet your client, through a series of chambers known in the security industry as man traps. A guard somewhere buzzes you in at one end, the door locks behind you, and then you wait to get buzzed out the other end. There's this pause in a chamber. Whatever noises there are in the larger world of the facility can still be heard in there, but they sound muffled and far away. Sometimes you use the wait inside to accustom yourself to the fact that you're now in a jail. Sometimes you use it to muster as much optimism as you can about life on behalf of your client as the case will allow. So eventually you work your way to the visiting room area where cool white fluorescence casts an impersonal glow on cinder block walls. Your client in an orange prison jumpsuit is escorted in by a guard. You shake his hand and ask him how he's doing there, just as if that were normal procedure around here. The consultation begins. Your client, who's generally grateful for a lawyer's visit, nevertheless has a tendency to be stressed out about being locked up. The client that I'll call Gabriel, for instance, although he's been fighting the good fight to man up and to grin and bear it like the stalwart person he is, has been tending to freak out as his incarceration has passed the 3-week mark. He's flashing back on an ordeal he had about half a dozen years earlier when he was tortured by his abductors who dragged him through Central America, bound for drug trafficking slavery here. Then, as now, his captivity was insured with guns. Now, as then, escape is not an option. It seems that the bad dreams that have haunted him since his abduction have tended to come back here nights at Delaney Hall. By the end of the interview, my sitting with him seems to have cheered him up, and that cheers me up too. But in return, he has bestowed upon me the weight of his case and the twin goals of getting him released and saving him from deportation. My life is in your hands, he tells me. This is both flattering and worrisome, given that the only thing I can do for him other than effort is that I can't guarantee him anything at all. In lighter moments, I think of this as my no guarantee guarantee. When you leave the interview area, you pass back through the chambers that you had passed through on the way in. You retrieve your belongings from the locker. And when you step outside, you have for a moment at least a new awareness of the value of mobility in general and of the out of doors in particular. That's mostly how you feel when you leave that place. But when you drive home with the window down, you also carry within you another awareness, namely that your client is still in there and you have yet to get him out. So that's some stories from my day job. I think what I'll do now, thank you. In a moment, thank you for listening. I'll take some questions if there are any. But before that, as a sort of outro, I'll just play a little bit of music into the microphone just to end this spiel. Okay, guys.